Hello, dear and beloved ones. Please subscribe to the channel and give this video a like. Brew some tea or coffee and enjoy watching. Uncle, take my little sister. She's 6 months old, and she's very hungry. Igor froze and turned around. He saw a 7-year-old boy gently holding a baby in his arms. But before we continue, let us know which country you're watching this video from. Enjoy listening. Igor was in a hurry. Time was pressing. A meeting with partners, on which the fate of a major project he had been working on for the past 6 months depended, was at risk of falling through. After his wife's death, work became the only thing that mattered to him, the only place where he could hide from the pain and emptiness that haunted him. Suddenly, a thin child's voice caught his attention. "Mr. Sir, do you by any chance need a baby?" Igor stopped abruptly, nearly bumping into the woman walking ahead of him. Frowning, he looked around. On the sidewalk, a skinny boy with big, frightened eyes and a dirty face cowered. He looked no older than 7. In his hands, he held a baby wrapped in a blanket that was clearly not suited for the season. The boy gazed at Igor with desperate hope. His look pierced through the armor of indifference that Igor had spent years building around himself. Something in that gaze reminded him of, "No." He tried not to think about that. "What did you say?" Igor asked, trying to keep his voice firm. He hated being distracted, especially now. I'm asking if you need Mashenka," the boy repeated hesitantly, clutching the baby tighter as if afraid Igor would take her away. "She's hungry, and we have nothing." Igor looked him over. The boy was dressed in a tattered jacket, clearly too big for him, and dirty sneakers. His face was smudged with dirt. "Where are your parents?" Igor asked, feeling irritation rise inside him. He was late, and this situation was throwing him off balance. The boy lowered his eyes. Mom left," he mumbled barely audibly. "She said she'd be back soon, but she's been gone for 2 days. 2 days. Igor pictured what these children had been through in the past 48 hours. A 7-year-old boy with a baby in his arms, abandoned in a huge, indifferent city. "And what have you been doing all this time?" Igor asked, trying to suppress his emotions. "Waiting," the boy replied, his voice filled with such resignation that Igor felt a pang of discomfort. "Waiting for Mom to come back. But Mashenka cries. She's hungry." Igor looked at the baby, Mashenka, a tiny, helpless creature, completely dependent on this exhausted little boy. And now on him too. After all, they had come to him for help. "What's your name?" Igor asked, his tone softening. "Vanya," the boy answered. "Vanya, listen," Igor began. "I'm in a hurry right now, but I can buy you something to eat. And maybe call the police. They can help find your mom." "No police," Vanya whispered, shaking his head. "They'll take Mashenka to an orphanage, and I don't want to go there." Igor frowned. He knew what an orphanage was like. He had spent several years in one himself before his grandmother took him in. The memories weren't pleasant. "All right," Igor said. "Then I'll buy you some food, and we'll figure something out." He took Vanya and Mashenka to the nearest store, bought fresh bread, milk, a bottle for the baby, and some fruit. Vanya devoured the food hungrily, while Mashenka sucked on the bottle eagerly. Watching them, Igor felt something strange. On one hand, he knew he had to leave. His meeting wouldn't wait. But on the other, he couldn't just abandon these kids to fate. Something inside him refused to let him walk away. Important meeting or not, he couldn't just leave them. Vanya looked up at him, fear in his eyes. "You're not going to leave us, are you?" "No," Igor said firmly. "I won't leave you. I'll figure something out." He pulled out his phone and called his assistant. "Cancel all my meetings for today. And tomorrow too. Yes, it's urgent." As he looked at Vanya, a child burdened with responsibilities far beyond his years, Igor realized that feeding them wasn't enough. He had to find out what happened. Where were their parents? But how? Vanya either didn't know or was too afraid to say. "Vanya, did your mom say where she was going?" Igor asked gently, trying not to scare him. Mashenka, nestled in his arms, had fallen asleep, her tiny fists resting against his chest. "I don't know," Vanya whispered. Igor sighed. He had to act quickly. He took out his phone and called the police, explaining the situation and giving them the address where he had found the children. "Wait there," the tired voice of the dispatcher responded. An officer is on the way. The wait felt endless. To pass the time, Igor played cartoons on his phone. At first, Vanya remained wary, but soon he was drawn into the colorful images. Mashenka kept sleeping, and Igor found himself watching her, mesmerized. So tiny, so vulnerable. She depended entirely on him and Vanya. Finally, the police arrived. Two young officers, tired and uninterested. They asked a few routine questions, took Igor and Vanya's statements. Vanya, clutching Igor's hand, answered in short phrases, avoiding eye contact. "Where's your mother? Where do you live?" one of the officers asked, looking down at Vanya. "I don't know," Vanya repeated like a broken record. Igor's irritation flared. Couldn't they see the child was scared? "Listen," Igor interjected. "I believe he truly doesn't know. They were living on the streets. He told me that himself." The officers exchanged glances. In any case, one of them said, "We have to take them to the station. They'll decide what to do next." Vanya gripped Igor's hand tighter, his eyes filling with tears. "Please, don't take us to an orphanage." Igor's heart clenched. He couldn't let that happen. "Wait," Igor said. "What are the options?" The officer shrugged. "We can place them in a hospital temporarily while we search for their mother. Or if you have the means." "If I have the means, what?" Igor asked, not sure what he was about to say next. "You could apply for temporary guardianship until we find their relatives. But it's a lot of paperwork." Igor hesitated. He was a single man, buried in work, completely unprepared for children. Taking responsibility for these two was madness. But looking into Vanya's pleading eyes, he knew he had no other choice. "I'll do it," Igor said firmly. The officers looked surprised. Clearly, they hadn't expected that. "All right, let's go to the station and handle the paperwork." As they navigated the bureaucratic maze, Igor called his friend Tanya, a social worker, asking for guidance. She promised to help. Hours later, after endless forms and signatures, Igor finally had the papers for temporary guardianship. Vanya sighed in relief, leaning against him. "Thank you," he whispered. Igor forced a smile. "Well, looks like you have a home now." His apartment was large, clean, and modern. Vanya stood in the middle of the living room, staring in amazement. To him, used to cramped, dirty spaces, this was a whole new world. "Make yourself comfortable," Igor said awkwardly. Vanya nodded, but didn't move. "Hungry?" Igor asked. "I got baby food from Mashenka, but there's plenty for you too." Vanya nodded again. Igor led him to the kitchen, offering him milk, cereal, and fruit. The boy grabbed an apple and devoured it. As Igor watched him, he thought his own childhood. Unlike Vanya, he had someone to care for him. This boy had no one. And now, maybe he had Igor. "Do you like it?" Igor asked. Vanya nodded, but immediately blushed and turned away. Igor realized that the boy was shy about expressing his feelings. "You can keep it," he said. "It's yours now." Vanya looked at him with gratitude in his eyes. That evening, when Masha woke up crying, Igor felt completely helpless. Seeing his confusion, Vanya stepped forward and offered to help. "I know how to calm her down," he said. "Give her to me." Igor hesitated but handed Masha over. The boy skillfully took her in his arms, gently rocking her while humming a soft melody. To Igor's surprise, Masha quickly settled down and fell asleep again. He watched Vanya in admiration, realizing that despite his young age, the boy already knew how to take care of others. He wasn't just a child. Life had forced him to grow up too soon. "Thank you," Igor said softly. "You really helped." In the following days, Igor tried to spend as much time as possible with the children. He read them fairy tales, played with them, and took them to the park. He noticed how Vanya was slowly opening up and beginning to trust him, while Masha constantly reached out to him, smiling and babbling. Igor felt his heart fill with warmth. He realized he was becoming attached to these children. He often imagined what their life together would be like, how he would care for and raise them. One evening, after Vanya had already fallen asleep, Igor sat beside Masha's crib, watching her peaceful face. He thought about how life sometimes brings the most unexpected surprises. He had never imagined he would become a father, but now he couldn't picture his life without Vanya and Masha. A new hope was growing inside him, a hope that he could become a real father to them, that they could become a family, even if not by blood. Suddenly, the phone rang. Igor, who had been reviewing reports, picked up. It was a call from Child Services. Igor, hi. We have news about Vanya and Masha's mother. Igor froze. He had been waiting for this moment, but now that it had arrived, an odd feeling washed over him. On one hand, he knew he should be happy. The children might be reunited with their mother. On the other hand, he had grown attached to them over these past few days, and the thought of parting with them hurt. Where is she? Igor asked, trying to keep his voice steady. We found her. She's in the city, but the woman on the line hesitated. Her lifestyle leaves much to be desired. She has substance abuse issues and lives a troubled life. She's currently in a rehabilitation center, but it's too early to talk about her returning to the children. Igor closed his eyes. He had suspected as much. What does this mean for the children? He asked, already knowing the answer. Formally, they should be returned to their mother once she completes rehabilitation and proves she can care for them. But given the circumstances, Igor made his choice. Most likely, the issue of depriving her of parental rights would soon be decided. In that case, the children would be placed under state care. Igor felt a wave of indignation rise in his chest. He imagined Vanya and Masha among strangers, under cold, indifferent gazes. He couldn't let that happen. Are there any other options? He asked, though he already knew the answer. There are, Tanya nodded. If a relative agrees to take them in, or she hesitated for a moment. Or you, Igor. You could apply for guardianship, or even adoption if you wanted to. He knew this was an option, but he had tried not to think about it. A successful businessman, accustomed to solitude and independence, suddenly becoming a father to 2 children. It seemed impossible. I need time to think, he muttered. Of course, Igor, I understand. But we don't have much time. A decision needs to be made within the next few days. After talking to Tanya, he sat by the window for a long time, lost in thought. That evening, when he returned home, he saw Vanya drawing at the table, concentrating. Masha was peacefully sleeping in her crib. Uncle Igor, Vanya suddenly asked quietly, looking up at him with serious eyes. What will happen to us? Igor sat down beside him and sighed heavily. I don't know, Vanya, he admitted honestly, but I will do everything to make sure you're okay. Will we be abandoned again? Vanya's voice trembled with unshed tears. Igor gently pulled him into a hug. No, Vanya, I won't leave you. I promise. At that moment, he realized his choice was already made. He looked at Vanya, his tired but kind face, and thought of Masha, her tiny hands, her trusting gaze. Something new was awakening in his heart, warm, bright, and real. Vanya, Igor said softly, you and Masha are very important to me. I want you to live with me. Vanya's eyes widened in surprise. Really? Really? Igor smiled. The boy threw his arms around him. Thank you, Uncle Igor. Thank you. Igor hugged him back, feeling warmth fill his heart. That night, he couldn't sleep. Lying in bed, he thought about the future. He understood that this decision would change his life completely. Guardianship, or perhaps even adoption, was a huge responsibility. He had to be ready for anything. He walked over to the window and looked up at the starry sky. I hope you're proud of me, he whispered. The next morning, he called Tanya. I want to apply for guardianship, he said firmly. Vanya and Masha should live with me. Tanya's voice was filled with surprise at first, but then it turned into joy. That's wonderful, Igor. I'll help you with all the paperwork. It won't be easy, but we'll get through it. Igor felt relief. He knew Tanya would support him. Gathering documents, interviews, inspections. The social services workers looked at him with curiosity. They were used to seeing people abandon responsibility, leave children to their fate. But Igor was determined. His life changed. He bought clothes, toys, books for the children. Vanya excitedly explored his new room, filled with toy cars and building sets. Masha happily cooed, playing with the rattles. He was learning to be a father. He read them bedtime stories, took them to the park, played hide and seek. He was learning to understand their fears, their needs, their joys, and he could see them changing. Vanya became more open, more trusting. Masha, despite her young age, felt his care, and reached for him, smiling. One evening, as Igor was tucking Vanya in a bed, the boy suddenly hugged him and whispered, "Thank you, Papa." Igor froze. He hadn't expected to hear that word. It touched him to the core. He hugged the boy tightly, feeling tears roll down his cheeks. "Good night, son," he whispered back. A few months later, Igor officially became their guardian. They moved into a country house with plenty of space to run and play. Igor had changed. The once cold and reserved man had become a caring, loving father. He had learned to enjoy the simple things in life. For the first time in a long time, he felt truly alive.